My name is Andrew Payton. This video is for my final paper on Anthropology 100W. I chose the samurai class, especially during the Tokugawa era, which began around 1603 until 1868, where the Meiji Restoration um, gained power back into the imperial court. What happened was the samurais were mainly servants to the imperial court, but through the Sengoku Jide period, which was a civil war throughout the country, samurai began to gain their independence and work for daimyos, which were lords, and they would be security, and they eventually gained a lot of power. And during the Tokugawa era, they settled down. It was a lot more peaceful. They had their own group. Samurai weren't considered their own group of people until the Tokugawa era, but they also started working in government instead of wartime. So the previous studies, there's been a lot, like the Cambridge history of Japan has told the ever evolving kind of story of Japan, which is very complex. It kind of during the 13th century, around 1285, there was two imperial courts. There was the military court called the shogun, and then there was the imperial court, which was only the people that were descended from Amaterasu, which was the sun goddess, were able to run the imperial court, but they became figureheads because the military were the ones that gained most of the power. So a lot of people studied a lot of samurai during the wartime. There's been more studies about it during the peacetime. But it's an interesting transition because the way of the warrior Bushido was to fight, honor, and duty, and now to work in the government and do bureaucracy and feast and it was a very interesting combination. So the anthropological concepts I came up with was the power dynamics, the cultural dynamics, mainly Bushido, the way of the warrior, and also it was the bureaucracy, aka government, which was interesting. So my thesis was saying that samurai were known as being warriors, but during the Tokugawa era, especially, they became government officials. They were working on lands, but they lost a lot of their power to the shogun, who the original founder was Ieyasu Tokugawa, and they were required to. There was an alternate system where half the time they were spent in Edo, where the capital of the Tokugawa shogunate was, because the shogunate was afraid that the military samurais would gain too much power, rebel, so that he wanted them close by so they could not cause more trouble and to kind of incorporate them. They were paid stipends called koku, which is kind of like the rice produced off the fields. But eventually they became broke. They ended up committing banditry, and it was very difficult to adapt from wartime to peacetime. So my thing was telling about the how complex the relationship between the samurai, the government, and their way of life is, in how they weren't just violent people, but they were actually very intelligent and had to adapt to ever changing circumstances. The research methods I chose was multiple books, including like the history of East Asia, which are used in Asian studies textbooks, as well as JSTOR. Some videos in Wikipedia I skimmed just to get a kind of basic concept, but a lot of mine are from like actual books written for samurai and Japanese history, which is super fascinating to me. The findings were that the samurai had a loyal code and they were very about honor and duty and respect. And so that was to serve their lord. And then in Tokugawa era was to serve the shogunate. But then they got lost because it was like, I'm so used to the way of my life, and now I have to work in the government. I have to be more peacetime. I can't just be violent. And so a lot of them contributed to the culture, the arts, religion, especially Shintoism was a national Japanese kind of. It was like the Japanese religion, but Buddhism came in, and so there wasn't really one unified religion. So the conclusion is that, and future research is that studying Bushido can allow people to work in government. The loyalty and respect, we can understand military methods, business methods, and how they adapted. Thank you.